Today's sermon is based on the 17th chapter of 1 Samuel. The entire chapter is devoted to the story of Goliath and David, which Spike talked about. And it's just packed full of good questions for us, challenges, all sorts of things that I think are just really meaningful today, as they have been across thousands of years since this story was written. We could get into whether or not what's the efficacy of it, did it really happen, all of these type of things. That's not important. The fact is that this story tells of what one person, one young man, in his faith could overcome with the help of God. Do you like to take on challenges? That's just a question everybody has to answer on their own. Do you like a challenge? Something that's probably difficult, something that may be impossible on the surface. A few years ago, when Bryce was coaching at Georgetown, they brought the Georgetown basketball team to play UK. Now, that was a true David and Goliath story there. And every few years before that, Spike Barbie, our alma mater, they called it the Battle of Broadway, came down the street, Trancy, and played UK. Well, it didn't do, obviously UK was not challenged in any particular way, but it sure was good for the coffers of Georgetown's program and of Trancy's program and of all others who come in like that as Davids to take on the mighty Wildcats as the Goliath. And it's a fun experience for those guys. The story of David and Goliath is such a tale. It's unlikely, except this one ends up differently than what Trancy in UK and Georgetown in UK and whoever else the pigeon is that they play, whoever that may be, this one ends up differently. And it speaks to the great power of God, to the great power of having faith in what God can do, to the power of God helping David. David was, probably a teenager. I don't know that we know his exact age at that time. We know that David would eventually rise to be the greatest king that Israel ever saw. And throughout the time of looking for the Messiah, David was one of the comparisons they made. The Messiah needed to be the new David, a very charismatic leader. And he needed to be the new Moses. Moses the lawgiver. Moses not the eloquent one, but Moses who gave Israel the law that it follows, that we follow to this very day. David was one who was impetuous. He did things that got him in trouble. He did things that he shouldn't have done. But through all of this, he went back to God. God forgave him and put him in the right direction. And he became the strongest king that they had ever experienced. He is the fourth son of Jesse. He had four older brothers. I'm sorry, ladies, they don't count girls, so we don't know how many sisters he had. We only know that he was the fourth son. And here's this boy that's called to take on Goliath. Sarah, can you follow me over here with the camera, please? I want to show you how tall Goliath was. Can you see this nail right here? That's 9 feet 6 inches. That's how tall Goliath was. Now that's even bigger than Shaq O'Neal. That's even bigger than a lot of these guys that are coming out of Europe now that are 7'6" and all of that. 9 feet 6 inches tall. The story is that here we have the Israelites on one side of the mountain. And here we have, the Philistines that were on another mountain. And there was a valley in between them. Each morning the armies would line up and they would think, is this the day we're going to do battle? And they would stand there a while. And finally, the Philistines would trot out Goliath at 9'6", and he'd walk down into the valley and he'd say, come on. Send me your best shot. Send me somebody to take me on. And the poor little Israelites, the scriptures say, they would just run back. They would just, oh my goodness, we can't take on anything like that. So the stage is set. If you look at the 17th chapter, they gathered their armies, the Philistines did, for battle. They were gathered at all these different places we won't read. And Saul and the men of Israel gathered and encamped in the valley of Elah, and drew up a line of battle against the Philistines. And they stood on the top of one mountain, Philistines on the top of the other, and Israel stood there with the valley between them. And out came from the camp of the Philistines a champion named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. Well, you know what 6 cubits and a span is, or 9 feet 6 inches. I looked it up because I knew 6 cubits and a span wouldn't make much sense to us. And listen at this. Listen at the size of this guy. He had a helmet of bronze on his head. He was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. I didn't look that up. It must be heavy. And he had on greaves, whatever they are, of bronze upon his legs, and a javelin of bronze swung between his shoulders. And the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and the spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and his shield bearer went before him. He stood on the banks of Israel, and he said, why don't you come out and fight me? Am I not a Philistine? Are you not servants of God? Choose a man among yourselves and let him come down to me. First 9 verses. That sets the stage. Don't worry, I'm not going to read this whole story to you because it's 58, it's almost 60 verses long. We'll be here long after the bell rings at noon if we do that. But I want to point out this so that we understand the disparity between these two guys. Here's little bitty David. Little bitty David who takes care of sheep. Little bitty David who writes psalms. Just little bitty David. And he comes out and Goliath says, choose a man. Let him come down to me. If he can fight and kill me, then we'll be your servants. But if I prevail and I should kill him, which he certainly thought he was going to, then you shall serve our servants and serve today. Now we're at verse 10. The Philistines said, I defy the ranks of Israel this day, and give me a man that we fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard this, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Who among us wants to stand up to somebody 9 feet 6 inches tall? Who wants to try to look up? Just come up here after church and look up at that nail. Just stand there like that. Remember the first time that I had the honor and the privilege of interviewing Tom Paine, who was one of the first African-American player on Adolph Rupp's team back in the early 70s. Here I am at my towering 6'5". Well, no, I know that's not true. Maybe I was 5'8" or 9 then, but I sure wasn't 6'5". And I'm talking to Tom Paine, who's 7 feet, and I'm asking him, and it's just, you see it on the sideline reporters. You see these little girls that are standing there, and they're holding up a microphone to some guy that they can't hardly reach his mouth. And he's just gotten through playing. He doesn't want to talk anyway, but he's got to do it. That's the picture we got here, people. We got a great big guy and a little bitty boy, and they're going to fight. They're going to do it. Now David, here we have David. He's the son of the Ephraimite of Bethlehem in Judea named Jesse, who had 8 sons. And it talks about what he did and his sons and so forth. And then it says at the end of that section, verse 16, for 40 days the Philistines came forward and took his stand, and morning and evening. And Jesse said to David, why don't you go over there and take your brothers some food? Take some cheese over for the army. Take them something to eat. You're just kind of insignificant in this whole situation, so let's do this. Get the idea of this guy that to other people, he looked as if he didn't have any real purpose other than just a little servant boy. The meeting with Goliath begins in the 19th verse. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning, left the sheep, took the cheese, and headed over to bring them food. And David left the things in charge, the keeper of the baggage, and ran to the ranks. As he talked with them, behold, the champion, the Philistine of Goliath, by name, came up to the ranks of Philistines and spoke some words as before. And David heard him. Then the people there said, this is what you get. This is what the king of Israel will give you if you can kill Goliath. All these riches, and one of the verses adds, and his daughter, all these riches and his daughter, you'll be so honored. You'll be honored among all people if you can do this. At the end of that chapter, or the end of that, I'm just got reading it in sections, 27, verse 27. People answered him in the same way. So shall it be done to the man who kills him, all of these honors. Okay, David says, I want to do this. I'm going to do this. I thought you were going to draw maybe some little round stones out of that bag in a sling. No, this was what he used, and it was just an incredible feat. Even they had to be laughing at him. Here's this giant with all this heavy armor that practically scrapes the sky, and they say, "And you go to fight him with what? Your sling and some nice creek rocks." All pretty little creek rocks, round or oblong, and so forth. David says down here, verse 34, but David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father. And when there came a lion or a bear, sounds like the Wizard of Oz or something, and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and smote him and delivered it out of his mouth. David went after him. Tough little guy. Delivered him. I caught him by his beard and smote him and killed him. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine, that's always important, in the Old Testament, circumcision. Are you, aren't you, or do you want to be, or do you not want to be? Well, this one wasn't. Shall be like one of them, seeing he has defiled the armies of the living God. He made God mad. David said to him, listen to this verse, folks, because this is something that can help you in the challenges of your life. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. Translate those to challenges. The Lord who delivers us will do this. And they took some armor that they had there, and they put it, and this is a great picture too. If we had a visual of this, here's little David, let's say he's 5'8", and they put all of this armor on him. It's down there in the next few verses. Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a helmet of bronze on his head, clothed him with a coat of mail. David girded his sword over his armor, and he tried and he couldn't even walk. Here he is, he's weighted down. He can't even move. He's got on so much armor. It's so heavy. And David said to Saul, I can't wear this. How can I fight anything wearing this stuff? For I'm not used to them. Did you know that the Old Testament had such exciting stories? I mean, this is just a saga. This is an exciting story of how this is developing. David took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones, 5, from the brook, and put them in his shepherd's bag, or shepherd's wallet, it says. His sling is in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Picture it. 9'6", 5'8", armor. The Philistine has a guy that even carries his spear because it's so heavy. Philistine said, what do you think I am? What do you think you sent out? He says, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? Philistine cursed David by his gods. Philistine said to David, come to me. Come on. Bring it. You've heard it. Bring it. Bring it. Come on. Let's go. He said, I'm going to eat you up. And I'm going to give your flesh and your parts and all of you to the animals. You come to me with a sword, verse 45, Come to me with the sword, with the spear, and with the javelin, but I come to you in the name of the God of hosts. He comes in the name of God. The name of the God of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. It's still just impossible to even wrap our minds around such a thing. But, verse 48, the action continues. I told you I wasn't going to read you the whole chapter, but it looks like we're going to hit the high parts and we might make it. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. And David put his hand in the bag. Here's 9'6" Goliath with a spear that's 6 miles long and all this armor. Put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, put it in the sling. It's one of those slings like, that they do like this. We think of a slingshot that that kids have had. That they're wide. They're pretty dangerous too. But this one was a little bit different. Slung it and struck the Philistine on his forehead, right between his eyes and where that frontlet comes down, I would think, because he had on heavy protection. Struck him right there. The Philistine held his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the ground. Is the story over yet? No, he's not dead. No, he's not dead yet. So David prevailed over the Philistine. Then he went over to him, took his sword, not David's sword, but Goliath's sword, cut off his head. That finished him off. That was about the end of the story there. He went on to finish the Philistine off, took the head with him, which probably was about the size of a basketball or two, carried it out on a pike, that's a stick, took it to Jerusalem, it says here. David carried the head around with him for a while to show what had happened, that God had prevailed. David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, verse 54, and put on his armor in the tent. When Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, verse 55, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is that youth? Abner said, as your soul lives, O God, or O king, I don't know. I don't know who he is. And the stripling is. And the king said, missed a line, inquire whose son this young man is. And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took another look at him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. Saul said to him, whose son are you, young man? David said, I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehemite. And that's the end of the story. The power of God prevailed in this story because of the faith of David and the faith of his abilities. In the 47th verse it says, may know that the Lord, back up just a little bit there so that you get the gist of that all the earth may know that God, the God of Israel, and that all his assembly may know that the Lord saves not with the sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. There you have the story of David and Goliath, a classic story that is loaded with a whole lot to think about. That there is nothing with God that cannot be overcome. Nothing. Personal, corporate, collective, there's nothing that cannot be overcome. But the thing is, we just have to say to God, man, it's just out of my hands. I don't know what to do. I'm beyond knowing what to do. And then, at that point, perhaps we get this inspiration. David hears on the evening news about this giant that's just intimidating. No, they didn't have evening news at that time. I want to be totally accurate. This giant that's intimidating the armies of Israel. He said, I can't do too much, but I sure can throw one of these rocks. He goes over there and puts his faith in God and said, God that delivered me from the paw of the bear, the God that delivered me from the paw of the lion is going to deliver me from this uncircumcised Philistine. Walks up to him, swings that thing. Down goes the Philistine. The earth shakes. The head comes off. End of the story. David goes on to be king of Israel, as we know. As I mentioned early on, the greatest ever. David's faith in God never faltered. Didn't matter what happened. Didn't matter who did what to him. Didn't matter how big the giant was. Didn't matter what it was. He continued to serve God. At the end of the week's end news every week, if you read it, which from the statistics, I don't know who does. But anyway, Sarah and I do it. I put there, with you in his service. I mean that, We're all in this together. We're all in serving God together. We may do it different ways. We may exude ourselves in different ways, but we're all in it together to serve God, to help strengthen his work on this earth. Let's just remember the story of David and Goliath, that where a little boy prevailed over a giant. Are you bow together in prayer? Our Father, we thank you for this great story, told over and over again for thousands of years now, from around the campfires of Israel as the night wore on, that the shepherds would share this story of their hero. As he became their hero and their king, they would share the story of little David, playing on his harp, writing psalms, tending the sheep, and slaying the giant. Help us, O God, to do all of that, to humble ourselves before you, to seek what it is that you want, what it is that you want us to do, and how we are to approach it. We ask it all in his name, your Son, Jesus Christ, and in your name, the one who inspired a little boy to slay a giant. Amen.